Hi everyone, in this video we're just going to do a very brief introduction to learning objectives. Learning objectives are something that the Ontario Learn review asks that each week of content has learning objectives in it. So it's a very important part about building your online course. Writing the specific objectives can be very difficult and can be very stressful to try and come up with written objectives each week. However, they are very important because they're a very important part of learning because they're a way to ensure that student learning can be measured. There is a strategy for creating learning objectives, and that strategy is called the SMART method. Making sure that your learning objectives are specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and timely. So by specific, we mean that each objective has a single key result. By measurable, we mean that each objective relates to behavior that can be measured, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in the next couple slides. Attainable means that each objective is realistic in terms of the available resources. So will your students actually be able to attain this objective? Relevant means that each objective is central to the goals. So making sure that it's relevant and central to the goals and overall design of your course. And finally, timely. So each objective should be accomplished at a timely manner. So if they're learning about a specific topic, then that learning objective should obviously relate directly to that content in a timely manner. Clear objectives do a number of different things. They're not only for teaching, they help you create your own content materials and help you organize what needs to be learned for any given particular lesson or week. They also help you with assessment and grading because you know what types of things that you're trying to assess once you've created your objectives. And objectives are also really helpful for students as well because at the beginning of a lesson, normally you would include your learning objectives there at the beginning, and students can see right from the outset exactly what the goals of that particular lesson are and what your expectations as a teacher are for the content that they're going through. One of the very important things about SMART objectives is that they need to be explicit and measurable. And I've got an example here. So for example, sometimes we'll say things like, at the end of the lesson, the learner will know this, or the learner will understand. Those are not great objectives because words like know and understand are not measurable or explicit. How do you judge whether somebody knows something? How do you measure whether somebody understands something? You can't, because you can't get inside the learner's head. So therefore, knowledge really needs to be explicit. And when you're creating your objectives, you need to say something like, okay, at the end of this session, the student will be able to describe something. The word like describe is much more measurable than a word like know or understand. So make sure that when you're creating your measurable objectives that you're avoiding words like think, know. The learner will be able to appreciate, they'll be able to remember. How do you measure that stuff? So keep that in mind when you're creating your objectives. And finally, usually when it comes to writing objectives, we want to have them moving up from lower order thinking skills to more higher order thinking skills. So our first objective might be somewhere on the lower order thinking skill, and then finally, when our final objective, if we have 3 or 5 for a given week, then the fifth one will be about these higher order thinking skills. And these thinking skills are popularized by Bloom. Benjamin Bloom developed this Bloom's taxonomy of educational objectives way back in 1956, however still very relevant to today's teaching. And really what it does is it creates these different categories of orders of thinking skills and objectives. So Bloom set it up so that it follows the thinking process. So in other words, you can't understand a concept unless you can first remember it, right? Or you can't apply a concept if you do not understand them. So we're going from lower order thinking skills to higher order thinking skills. Now, over the years, Bloom's taxonomy has been revised, but it still represents the learning process. So it's been revised. So instead of knowledge, now it's about remembering. Instead of comprehension, now it's about understanding. So I believe it was in the 1990s, there was a number of educators that got together and created a revised Bloom's, updated the Bloom's. So now usually people tend to think of this in the highest level, the highest order of thinking skills is creating. However, one thing that's very important to understand about Bloom's is not everybody necessarily learns in the same order and in the same manner. So you can really start at any level of Bloom's taxonomy. So don't necessarily limit yourself to Bloom's revised taxonomy, but just understand that when it comes to creating learning objectives, that normally we want to move up this scale as we have more and more learning objectives.